D sharp, G sharp, and 5 C sharp. Greetings, my name is Michael Miller. This is a Michael Miller trademark training video out to you because you're watching. Thank you. It's meant for Michael Miller Pilates licensed affiliates, the Core New Core, and anyone interested in surviving as a Pilates instructor. Just 5 things today on my list of titles, and simple, easy things in a way. I saw a short box being taught recently in a group, and I saw round back being taught first, and I thought, okay, that's great, right? And then I saw flat back being taught second. I said, okay, that's great, in that it's the sequence that I anticipated. And then there was a twist, which comes after round back and flat back, but side bending acknowledges the whole lateral plane that our body lives in. Did I say that right? The plane that divides us in two, the frontal plane from front to back, right? It's that plane that is simpler than rotation. And it's that plane that defines the flexion, extension, and side bending, defines three-dimensional space. And so when my title says short box, mind the pattern I'm talking about is controlling flexion and extension, and then side bending before you get into rotation. Because in each of those patterns, you explore your range of movement. And to explore rotation before you've really, ideally, just explored the plane out to our sides, right? That divides us in two, front to back, until we not only bend forward and backward, but we express ourselves laterally to the side. Then comes rotation. And so flexion, extension, side bending, and rotation is a fundamental pattern. And yes, I left off the word torsion, because torsion is an exotic form of rotation. But fundamentally, front to back, sideways, and then rotation is the pattern that exists. I can show it to you in all of Joe's original work. Now, in the puzzle pieces that I have, you can easily see the picture, but the whole picture is not there, of course. And so, as an instructor, to survive as an instructor, let me tell you that once I tried to organize an Olympics of Pilates, and all my fellow instructors were aghast at the idea of having Pilates be something competitive. And from their perspective, I can understand that, but from my perspective, there's an ideal involved, and when there's an ideal involved, and there's an effort to ideally express the purpose of the exercise, then if the exercise has a purpose, its expression is something I think you can judge. Whether or not the person doing it has any business doing the expression, well, that's where the Pilates instructor comes in, right? To me, knowing the ideal and then making it most potently real for your student by what you pick to do next and how you cue the exercises that you cue, right? So, it didn't turn into it ended up being a demonstration. And in the demonstration, at the end of it, was a mat performance. And because I thought overall time was getting long, I cut the mat short and regret it to this day, because everybody in the audience sort of gasped because they had expectations about what was next. And to the extent that I denied them the fulfillment of what they expected next and their ability then to judge it, of course, has been a valuable reminder about the fulfillment of the expectation and the fact to me that Pilates is a sequence. There is expectation capable in the performance of the work because you know the order. And so on short box, I remind you to mind the pattern. And if you're unaware of it, implement it, however you do it, to whatever extent you do it in. But acknowledging that there's a willfulness to express a pattern, and that the pattern does lateral bending before it takes in the space that flexion, extension, and side bending defines. You know, three-dimensional space. And so I'm glad, and they did the exercises well. And it was well cued, even though I didn't understand the language. But because I didn't understand the language, and I'm watching to evaluate and be an instructor and observe, right? I saw round back, I saw flat back, and then I saw twist. And it's like, okay, now that's the right order if you pick those three things. But to me, a missed opportunity to further ingrain, especially if you're recording, the presence of the primary pattern, to acknowledge three-dimensional space before you encompass it rotationally. Acknowledge it in plane before you engage in rotation. So that was number one. Number two, Reformer and the Star. Again, on social media, as I've talked about, I think we'll see more and more demonstration of actual Pilates exercise, and it will be a broader spectrum from very subjective to very ideal, if you want to paint a spectrum that way. On number two, on Reformer and the Star, it's an advanced exercise, and I saw it where, to me, it was in opposition to the notion of inhaling and moving away from center as you inhale, like opening to the star on the inhale, and then closing on the exhale towards center. So the point being, you know, how are you loading your body during phases of your breathing? So not to make it, doesn't matter as much which way you're doing it, as being aware of how you're doing it, and then having a feeling for how that influences your control in the movement. And so on the example of the star I saw, I'm leaning this way, it starts open, and when you go out, the star closes. The arm comes towards center, and the leg comes towards center. And then when you come home, the star opens. And see, I really don't even know the breath on that, right? But for me to share with you my understanding of the star and the Reformer is that it starts ideally in a plank position with of the body, with the arms coming down and the arm coming down and supporting, and the top arm on the body. The inhale takes the body out and in, and you just try to accomplish that before you articulate or move the top arm and leg. Right? And it's only when you actually have control of your trunk and can go in and out with just your trunk and arms, part of your trunk and leg, upper body, upper arm, upper leg, that you then engage it fully and inhale, push out, open up, and exhale, come back. Inhale, open up when you go the other plane, and exhale, come back. So on that, there's two things I'm trying to point out. One is that even though it may not be implemented right away, the body engages itself and inhales as it takes on load, because the inhalation is part of the distribution of the load. And to get the best uniform engagement of the musculature of the body, your inhale is part of that. And your exhale brings you back to home. So if I were to transform right into being the instructor and observing that, I'd want to hear the breath and I'd want to feel it in person first. And if I saw then the same thing without any other information, I'd say, okay, that's very nice and very controlled. Now here's another way to do it. Not different, not better, not worse, just different. Okay? It's an opportunity to compare two feelings so you can develop more control in how you choose to move. Number 3, you choose the way you look at things. I don't have a lot to say about that other than the fact of the first 2 words in the statement. You choose the way you look at things. You know, it isn't just the way things are. Never is, really. And so you choose the way you look at things. Another way to say that is you choose your attitude. And attitude goes nicely into the technical use of the word for a body in space, and its attitude given a 3-dimensional reference. Right? So you choose the way you look at things, but number 4 comes from Stephanie Frick on Facebook and on Instagram is sharing images in yoga and Pilates and other modalities. And in this instance, it brought me to make a title called Catenary. Because as an instructor, I want you to know about what a catenary is. A catenary is a curve, for one thing, and it's a curve, oh, I should have it. Oh, I do. It's a curve that is defined by, so here's chain link, right? And if I hold this from 2 ends at a particular distance, the curve that makes is a catenary. If you make the difference bigger, the shape is still a catenary because it's the curve that it makes between 2 ends of a chain, of course, suspended in gravity. Okay? Now, suspended in gravity is the key to understanding this, because it's gravity that defines the shape. And if you turn that shape over, like that, so instead of being curved this way, it's curved this way, that's the shape that they designed the St. Louis Arch on. they constructed the arch in that shape of a curve, because that shape of a curve, because it's defined by gravity going one way, and this is a layman's explanation, right? But it's the fact that a catenary is the shape of the St. Louis arch, and they built it in that shape to sustain the load, to hold up the weight of the arch. That's the most ideal shape, to have that much arch up in the air. My opinion, and you can go check on it, go ask Google. But the reason I say catenary is because Stephanie shows a picture of a back bend, some yoga posture, in which from her knees to her hips to her shoulders is such an ideal curve. It makes me want to print out a shape of a catenary and hold it up to her image. And it's in the smoothness of the curvature that the load is distributed over. It's a beautiful shot. Make friends with Stephanie Frick on Instagram and YouTube, and an incredible aspirational views of the body engaging itself, of the human being engaging itself. Number 4. Okay. So just then I made a distinction, right, of the body engaging itself, which to me is like, okay, there's the body, and there's all the musculature in the body, and everything else that's in the body making an engagement. But to me, there's more than that engagement to the human being. Because not only is it alive, it has the capacity to observe, right? And so on number 5, that humanity knows that there's a shape of a curve that's defined by the way a chain hangs in space, and then they flip that curve upside down in order to support load of its own essence, its own construction. As a Pilates instructor, it's something to know that the shape of a curve that you're after, in some instances, now round is round, I understand that, and there's other shaped curves, I understand that, but when you know that there's a curve that is defined by gravity, that influences how a body, whether it's a big arch in St. Louis or your own human body, the curve that it assimilates to influences how heavy the body is in space, or how the body absorbs its own load. You okay with that? Now maybe that's just way too layman for you, and you need more science behind it, but what matters to me conceptually is that as an instructor, you know about the catenary curve, and you know that some shapes in Pilates, like teaser, in some ways fit, depending on where you measure, fit inside of a catenary curve, right? And if that's pure malarkey, pure wishful thinking, as an instructor, I'm using wishful thinking to assume ideal shapes in space. And shapes in space is an old-time phrase about Pilates, right? Pilates is about the same shape in different shapes in space. It's the same shape, somehow different in space. To me, of course, you go through a progression of patterns that have the body in different shapes, and that then in turn goes to distinctively different levels of distance away from center, from supine to laying on your side to seated, right, to kneeling on all fours, to kneeling, to standing, to metatarsals only, continuing to move away from center, absorbing more of your own weight with less contact supports, and plugging into your student, of course, without even knowing that it's happening, but just by how they move from the seat that they're waiting for you in, just by how they're sitting there. Right? All of that becomes part of the very complicated process as an instructor of guiding their movement. Now we're on to movement, number 5. And number 5 is, again, from social media, another star in my, is Violeta Rubin at Be Beer Pilates. It's Spanish, I think, for be alive. But on a Monday morning, her message was move. See? And what does that mean? Move means what? And I would easily label for me what that means is when you move, maybe moving and running on a treadmill while you're watching the news is one means of moving. And yes, that is definitely better than sitting on the couch watching the same television. So moving is a good thing. But for me, the magic of moving comes in when instead of making it mindless and ignoring its occurrence, that you use the movement, right, to pay more attention to the movement. And the paying attention to the movement is on an intellectual level because you're thinking more about the purpose of the movement and you're aware, at least I'm talking about me, I'm thinking about the purpose and I'm thinking about the ideal I'm trying to express in terms of am I holding my back straight or am I in a smooth curve? And in pursuit of that idealness in my thinking, Pilates would just be hobbling along on 2 crutches if it were just body and mind, right? Because the third capacity within the human being of observing, in addition to their thinking and their being, that connects the human being to the universe faster than light. Now that statement has some physics in it. Bell's theorem, non-locality, superluminal, quantum, all the quantum outlook and observing and the way observing plays into the interpretation of our experience, and how much Pilates, body, mind, and spirit, now spirit as defined by Michael Miller Pilates, is this observing that the human being is capable of. If you give yourself an opportunity to move at any time, but especially on a Monday morning, and that movement is intellectually driven towards observing what you're sensing to exert more control over your expression, right? It's the observing component. I've said this 1,000 times, right? The capacity in the human to observe may never be directly addressed by everybody that promotes Pilates and sells Pilates, and they keep it within a realm of intellectualism, or, well, see, but it's just, if they don't actually acknowledge the physics of our time, my time, and this might be your time, and that might mean it's Miller time. So, move to me means you got to be observing. And the opportunity to observe it's something that you can think about and reach for an ideal expression of is like a huge deep dive as a human being into coordinating your capacities in those 3 areas. Being, thinking, and observing, and coordinating them, not just highlighting them or making them each bigger, but expanding them coordinated completely. So move means what? Move can just mean move and disregard, or it can be move and observe. And MMP is about observing, being the role of spirit, and completely coordinated. Because that's the most elusive capacity of all. Whether you distinguish it from thinking or not. And see, if primarily you think you're thinking, you think you are your thinking, then a good Pilates instructor doesn't disrupt any of that, or disturb that, or make all that thinking uncomfortable. You know, you wouldn't be a very good Pilates instructor if you couldn't deal with heady people. And by heady, I mean thinking, or, you know, really into their minds, to where, you know, there's little room for interpreting or embracing something that in any way takes thinking away from itself. And so it's up to the Pilates instructor to draw observing into the thinker's world, so that to the thinker they can live comfortably inside their own thinking without recognizing that in their best moments during the class, when they were most engaged, they were still thinking, but they also had a coordination or an interaction with observing as well. Okay, so I never came up with a summary before I came in here. The more I look at what's out there in Pilates and realize that the 10,000 things are multiplying and by the moment, the more comfortable I am in a very clear view of Pilates that helps me make sense of everything else. And I hope that's what my efforts to profess this have helped you as well. In the short box, it's such a clear pattern. And to expand, why don't we do side bending on stomach massage? Which is a sequence that happens right. I mean, you lie down and you do a pattern. You sit up and do the same pattern. You sit up on a box and things change because now your feet are anchored and you're articulating pelvis against femurs instead of where it's been so far. But in that change, the consistency in stomach massage is round back, flat back, side to side. But there is no side to side in stomach massage. There's just twist. That's in Joe's old work, right? But in short box, you go round back, flat back, and then side to side before rotation. And that's because it fits. Right? It fits. A side to side effort in a flow, doing stomach massage doesn't translate. At least it didn't for Joe, that I ever found out. And yet you get to short box, and you get the fuller expression of the pattern. So mind that pattern of flexion, extension, and then side bending, because it defines the 3D space of physics that we live in. It's practical, at least at being a Pilates instructor, and it's nice to know that the two planes of flexion, extension, and side bending, idealize the space that we're in, and that the rotation then becomes a further, more complicated idealization within that space. The number 2 star was about inhale away from center and exhale towards center, and that your limbs open up away from center as you expand and exhale as you come home. But you get there in stages so that you control at each stage before you take on more load. Meaning you go in and out with just holding your top arm and leg to your side and being engaged as a single unit and just articulating at your shoulder before you then open up more weight away from center by lifting leg and arm as you move away from center out into spring tension. It's an advanced exercise. Just don't go run out and try to do it without being able to observe where you are in your control so that you don't exceed your range of control. That's what Pilates really is about, right? You build this observation in all of your efforts to know what's within your range of control and what's not. So that when you skate out onto thin ice, you know how to get back to either thicker ice or skate faster. That's silly, I know, and I don't mean it to be profound or make a lot of sense. All right. Life can't live forever. Read between the lines. See behind the curtain. Add 2 and 2. Direct your thinking. Direct your observing. Geist.